So good morning, welcome everyone, or good evening if you're in Europe, like Hildur. She's in Berlin. She just flew back from the United States today, and we just talked about how one of her biggest strengths is sleeping on a plane. Uh, Besides composing, of course. We are very happy to have Hildur with us today. I don't think I have to introduce Hildur much. Oscar, Grammy, BAFTA, Golden Globe, multiple SCL awards, like you name it. Projects like video game Battlefield 2042, television Chernobyl, Haunting in Venice, Women Talking, Tar, Joker, and uh, many, many projects. I just wanted to, well, good. Hello, Hildur. Thanks for being here.
Hi, great to be here.
Um, so today we want to talk about, I know you've done some field recordings, you've been on set many times, you've customized sounds and instruments. So we want to talk about that. Just gonna start with a few questions because I know from feedback that membership has a lot of questions for you, and then I want to pass it on. So if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat room, you can raise your hand, and Connor and I will look out, or you can do the little button that raises the hand virtually. And yeah, so Hilda, I want to go back to, we started working first on Chernobyl, and that was, there was a lot of, if you want to talk about the process, like going to the power plant and doing your field recordings and how you then process those recordings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think when I start a project, I'm always kind of trying to understand where the music can serve the story best. Like what is it that can't be said in the story that you can see with your eyes or that you can film? And I think in Chernobyl, it was just so clear to me that the main character of the story was really the radiation, and that was something that you can't see with your eyes. So I just thought that the radiation needed to be felt through the sound and the music, even though radiation doesn't actually have sound specifically, but I felt like the closest I could get to having actual radioactive sounds was to go to this power plant in Lithuania, in Ignalina, which is like the sister power plant to Chernobyl, basically. So it's exactly as Chernobyl was, and that's where they shot the series. So I think, like, field recordings are really interesting, I think, because especially when you're telling a story that happened in real life, like it's not a fictional story. I think you can tell a lot of truth with real recordings, I think, and so you can kind of really be true to the facts of the situation, and that was also really important to me in this situation, that I wasn't kind of sensationalizing what happened, and because it's horrendous enough. So basically, we went there and just spent the day kind of observing the space, and not, because I, like, in my mind, that's really what field recordings are. It's recording a space as an observer. So I didn't activate the space in any way. Like, I didn't bang on anything, or slam any doors or something like that. Like, I wanted to hear what the space sounded like in and of itself. And I think that's kind of the difference between field recordings and musical recordings, or material recordings of any other sort. And so I think field recordings don't necessarily have to, like, happen outside or anything like that. It's just like recording as an observer, I would say, rather than an activator. So then the longest and most kind of the hardest process of this of that project was to kind of mold those recordings into like musical clay that I was able to use as musical material, because the whole score is made only out of these recordings, and there's not a single instrument. So the only instrument in the whole score is my voice. So that's the only kind of like the human element and the only instrument. So there was just like months of digging through every single second of the recordings and pinpointing, like, a sound that could be kind of EQ'd out or pitched up or down or like stretched in any way, shape, or form. So it was like, just micro listening and then picking out. And so it was a really fun process. And I think it says a lot in general about my way of working. Like I'm quite process focused. Like I'm more interested in the process of making music rather than I'm necessarily interested in the outcome. So which is maybe to some people sounds a bit backwards, but I think for me as a composer and as a performer, that's really the most fun that I have is in the process of making it. And the more fun that process is, and the more that I can kind of learn or experience or kind of explore in that process, the more fun I have, and therefore kind of the more point I think it is for me to do this work to begin with, because yeah, I feel like if I'm too focused on the outcome, then I kind of start just drawing on stuff that I already know, and I have there's more of a danger of starting to repeat yourself and stuff like that, when you're so yeah.
So when you work that way, though, when in the timeline did you go to the power plant? Like, was the series already done, and you looked at the images, or were you working off the screenplay? And were there spotting sessions before, and then you knew what music you need, or like.
No, so I started. I try to always start as early as I can. So I prefer to start from the screenplay. So because that's the moment where I feel the most freedom to explore the connection that I have to the story. So I feel like, when I'm reading a book or a script or something, I feel like there's a lot of music in the written word. I feel like in the way that a script or a book is written, I feel like, there's a specific tempo and a feel that you can get from just reading a script. And that's the moment where everything is open and you can kind of like really kind of dig into your own feelings about what the story is,
Mhm.
and for me, normally it whether or not I do a project is kind of determined in that stage. Like when I read the script, like if I have a strong sense of tonality or musicality or tempo or a very strong an idea comes to me very strongly or something like this, like that's when I know that I can trust that I feel like I have something to bring to the story. And if I don't have that initial reaction, then I'll probably not take on the project, and not because I don't like the story or the people, but it's just like that initial spark kind of has to be there for me, because obviously when you work in this way, it takes way longer than if you get like a final edit and you're working with on a timeline of like 3 weeks or something like this, as opposed to this way of working takes very often like 3 years. So it's a really long process, and it's not necessarily like economically viable because you get paid the same, even though it takes like, 50 times longer. But it's just, again, it's for me, it's just such a part of the process for me to be able to really spend that time just feeling that I'm saying that what I'm saying has some sort of value or resonance or relevance to me. So yeah, so for back to Chernobyl, I want to record the sessions basically the day before they started the setup for their shooting. So I was there like literally the day before the shoot.
Oh, wow. So you had to, how was that like going to this power? Because it's not in operation. Is it still in operation or is it out of operation?
No, it was
Power
being
plant?
decommissioned. So
Okay.
people are working there like 24/7, just taking the whole, like, dismantling the whole thing. It was very bizarre. It was super bizarre. So, but you have to go, but it's still totally like radioactive. So I have to go in like a full hazmat suit, and every single cable had to be screened and cleared, and so it was like you can't drink anything in there, or like obviously eat anything. So it was a pretty intense experience. But I think these are the things that you bring with you to the working process, I think, as well, because it was so interesting going in there. And of course, like first of all, understanding just the process that the people working in this environment need to the time that it takes just to put on these clothes and all of this, is it takes quite a while just to get in. And then that just like what was the most striking to me was the sheer like scope of the space. It was ginormous, these spaces. Like the turbine hall was definitely by far the biggest space I've been in. It's like, it spans like many floors, and just like it's vast, and the corridors are like, kilometers on end, and I think you need like something like 3 months of training just to be able to work in one part of the power plant, because it's so huge. So when you've experienced that, in real life, just walking the corridors, then the whole kind of scenario of the story, just like, when they're in this panic of trying to understand what's happening, and they're running, and you're just like, oh my God, they had to run forever just to kind of understand what's happening and stuff, like, it becomes much more visceral when you understand the environment of the story that you're telling, I think. So especially when it's true, I think I think that's the difference between working with a fictional story and the real story, I think is quite big, because I think they're or I always feel like when I work with a real story, there has to be a certain amount of honesty and reality in how you approach it, basically. So yeah.
So, I mean, you said there's a question in this thing where you interacting with the power plant by causing noise, and you just said earlier, no, you were just listening and trying to
Yeah.
get inspired by the sound that was in the room.
Yeah.
But that also means you don't go in with any. What I hear is there's no preconceived, like there's no concept or anything. You're really going in there very open and kind of letting the space guide you. Do you understand that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was just, it was fantastic that the director and producers and everyone trusted me to do this, because, in the beginning of the process, I was like, yeah, I want to make the whole score out of this power plant. And they were just like, yeah, how are you going to do that? And I was like, well, I don't know. I have to figure it out as I go. So, it was quite wonderful that they put so much trust in what I was doing, which not everyone would have done. But and for quite a while I was like, oh my God, is this idea even remotely going to work? And this is like, what kind of stupid idea is this? But it's just, yeah, then it's just a question of I guess like stubbornness and persistence and just trusting that your initial idea and that your initial feeling is is valid and has value, because I think the first thought is always the best thought, is rings very strong with me. Like I really put a lot of faith in that one saying. So maybe a bit too much sometimes, but if you're stubborn enough, you can see it through.
And Hildur, you also did field recordings in France, I think, for Battlefield 2042 for the video game.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, because that then is not only field recordings, you then use the sound, but obviously there's also live instruments. So can you talk, is that process then different in some ways, or do you kind of have to match the sound more, or recreate the natural sounds with instruments? What is that process like if you do not only field recordings?
Yeah. Well, I think that the big difference between Chernobyl and Battlefield, of course, is that Battlefield is obviously a completely fictional story. And in the beginning, when we started to work on it, the focus, like the idea was to have the focus much more on the environment, and it was supposed to be much more kind of based on the on climate change and like environmental factors, which is why we're factoring in these field recordings of specific environments that were connected to the story. And then it changed a little bit, that process, because I mean, mostly due to COVID, it was kind of in the beginning of the pandemic. So the working process and the story and the whole kind of structure of the game really changed, so but there were still these initial ideas were also present in the game. So we therefore, like, it was very valid to keep those recordings. But then somehow, as that changed, and it became more kind of it became more like human focused, the story, then the score kind of became more instrumental as it went, as the process went on, basically. Because yeah, and I think, I mean, that's of course also the difference between working in with a linear story, where you have like a beginning and a beginning, a rise, and an end. You're working within this kind of the narrative form, but in a video game, it's a completely different way of working, because that's it's much more modular, basically, and it's much more in flux. I think there's a lot more, or at least in this sense, there was a lot more things that changed in the process than normally happens within a film. Like when you're working on a film, there's not that much or I mean, you can have drastical changes in edit and stuff like that, so there can be, of course, big changes, but the story is normally more or less the same, so I'd say that's quite a bit difference between working between those mediums.
Hilda, so when you do those field recordings, especially in Chernobyl, do you keep it very minimal as far as what you bring? Do you bring several mics and recording devices? What do you use for field recordings?
Yeah, so for these recordings, we brought some some kind of ambisonic microphones, or surround microphones, that could really capture like a whole space. And then we brought a lot of piezo, like pickup microphones, so you can like really record surfaces. And that was kind of some of the most interesting recordings that we got from this recording session, because you can really, when you record with piezos, you can really kind of go into much more detail into the sound that's happening, like in a surface or in a room or something like this. Then that was one of my favorite sounds that we recorded in that trip was that there was like this door to some sort of engine room, and I heard this like kind of just faint sort of ticking that was coming through the room, that because it was kind of structurally there was some engine in some other room that was kind of making some vibration that was going into this door. So I picked that up when I was in the because we were just basically we were waiting for some engineer to give us some electricity or something, and this is just what I heard when we were there waiting, and then I picked that up, and it was a super high pitched sound. It was like, like barely audible, and then I pitched it down, and it basically sounded like a drummer, and it was like this like jazz, it was like this snare jazz solo happening in this door. So that's really one of my favorite recordings that we did. That's if anyone's curious to hear it later, I think that it's on the soundtrack record, and I think it's just called The Door or something like this. And it literally sounds like a drummer that's just kind of like minding his own business, doing like he has like fills and everything. It's really cool.
Do you think like doing field recordings and having those sounds that occur at the power plant also kind of energetically, emotionally makes a difference in the score? Because for me, Chernobyl, especially the bridge scene, it is so emotional, and I mean, you really feel everything that is going on. And do you think using those naturally occurring sounds and the sounds from the power plant that kind of also makes a difference in that way by what people feel?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because like one of the main comments that I had for that score was that, people felt it was so radioactive. And I was like, well, it genuinely is radioactive. That's why it probably sounds like that. So I definitely, I think, for me, for my process working on it, and then I definitely feel like, you can just feel a difference in recordings that are true and recordings that are fake. I think there's always a real presence that you can feel in recordings for sure. So yeah, I think it makes a huge difference.
Nice. Um, One thing you said early on now in this conversation was that you like to score what you cannot see in the film, or
Mhm.
like this in between. Do you work like that all the time on every project? And do you basically look at the script and see, okay, what's in the script and what is not in the script and what is here, and that's what you score, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I basically tried to there was a thing that Kate Blanchett said once that was so beautiful. She was talking about like listening to the story that's not being told, which I think is so interesting. And that's like something that music can do so beautifully, because it can kind of subconsciously go into these these other realms of the storytelling that what you perceive through your eyes can't really do as effectively, I think. For example, in Tar, because I'm speaking of Kate, like there's uh like when I was working on Tar, one of the most interesting things about that, for example, was to, because I wrote the music that the character is writing in the film. And that the interesting thing about that music that she was writing is that she was writing from a place of the person that she was in reality, and not the person that she was projecting in the film. And this is something that I feel like was kind of sadly quite overlooked, was that the music that she's writing was actually very kind of delicate and simple, and so the person that she wanted to be and the person that she wanted to create as was quite delicate and fragile and simple. But the person that she was projecting, and that the person that kind of everyone took away from that character, was that she was just like this total bitch. But that was, as we learned in the film, that was not the real character. That was the character projecting this other character. So I was basically writing as the sub character that was not being projected but was kind of hidden in the music as she was writing. So, for example, I think that that film had quite a happy ending to me because she could kind of get away from, you know, this character, this monster character that she had created, and just go back to being herself, you know, which I feel is what she, you know, actually wanted to be, you know, doing. And you can hear that through the music that she is writing, you know. And yeah, and I wish that more people had picked up on that, but that was definitely the story that was being subconsciously, or one of the stories that was being subconsciously told, but not projected. So it was like, you know, listening to the story that wasn't being told.
Well, that process then seems, you know, obviously is very different than going on a project and getting the film and having temp music in there, for example. So do you then have, like in that instance with Todd Fields, the director, do you have early conversations and basically talk about your ideas and what you see, how you see the character, and how would you approach the score? And do the director also ask for examples, or is it very conceptualized in the beginning?
Yeah, no, I was the second person to join TAR after Kate. And so I was like in the super early dialogue before they even location scouted or anything. Like we were talking about how we wanted to approach the music. And so that was just like, yeah, this long, extended, deep conversation with Todd and Kate, you know, about like, you know, how to approach the writing and you know what the music was that was being written and all of this and that was just such a fascinating project musically, because it's a film about the process of making music. It's not necessarily a film about, like, you know, just music, but it's the process of making it. We're always in rehearsal. We're never in concert. We're never hearing the final anything, you know. And like I said before, like that to me is the most magical part of the musical process, is being in rehearsal and the communication and the, you know, the process of writing and all of these things. So it was just so fascinating, and so many different layers of music, because it was the music that she's writing, and then it was obviously the music that's being rehearsed, like Mahler and Elgar and these pieces. And then Todd and I, we basically went through the whole script and tempo mapped the whole script kind of by character. So we we kind of set like a BPM for each character, and then I wrote music that you actually never hear in the film, but I wrote music to basically accompany the BPM of each character, so they could listen to that while they were shooting. And so there was kind of like character study music that was never heard. And then, of course, you know, the last layer was the score and the music that was actually like in the film. But that again, you know, because you already had so much music, which just needs its space to do its job properly. We had very kind of limited space for actually making any kind of big statements with the score. And because I also really feel like, you know, there's only a certain amount of bandwidth that you have for music within a project. Like you have to be very careful with like where you place it and how you place it. I think is almost as important as what you're doing, you know. And I am of the school that likes to work more kind of sparsely and have like bigger moments when you have the moments. But yeah, so the bandwidth that we had for the score was already kind of like, you know, had gone down quite a bit. So after a lot of experimentation, we kind of figured out that the most interesting place for the score was almost in a kind of subconscious level. So there's like 45 minutes of score in the film, but the audience most likely never realizes that they're hearing the score. So the score is kind of like bubbling under the whole thing, and it's creating this extremely like eerie, uncomfortable feeling, but the audience never kind of perceives what's happening through the music. but it's a very different film. Like if you take out the whole score, it's a completely different film. So that was super interesting, I think, as well, because I think that's one of the most magnificent things about music is how subtle you can be with kind of accessing people's emotional responses. Like you can do that in such a sneaky way with music that I find really interesting. Slightly manipulative, but also interesting.
I find it super fascinating, and also, the fact that you created this music for for Kate and for other performers to listen to and get right into character, and obviously you've done that also on the first Joker, and I mean, we all know about the story about the bathroom dance and how you really influenced not only the performance by Joaquin Phoenix, but also I know everyone on set was listening to the music because you started so early, and Todd Phillips gave everyone your music to get into, director of photography, editor, whatever. And one thing you said earlier is, going to Joker, and then I'll go back to audience, to membership questions. You said that for you also as an artist, you always, every project you don't want to go back to the same old, and you want to avoid like doing things you've already done, things that already exist, and want to create something new. So how do you do it when you basically work on a sequel like Joker 2 now, and to challenge yourself to go into new territory for the character you've written for before?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, the I think the music, I mean, the score was such a big part of the character in the first film, and it was, it was kind of like, almost like, his makeup or something. It was very easily identifiable as completely his character. So we knew that we didn't want to go too far away from that. Like we knew it was really clear that the sound world kind of had to be in the same realm, just as the makeup didn't change, so that was kind of like a great starting point. But I mean the real kind of challenge came in that film with just having all these songs, because there's like 12 songs or whatever in the film, and the songs kind of historically live in a very different place from the sound world that the score lived in. So it kind of became like this gigantic musical jigsaw puzzle, just like how to marry these sound worlds. And of course the way that the songs were being used in the film was that they were carrying quite a lot of the narrative. The narrative of the story was being carried quite a lot through the song. So I think the narrative of the first film, of course, was carried quite a lot with the score. So there was, just speaking about this bandwidth again, like, so there was a very different space for the score to operate in, because the songs were already taking up such a big big amount of bandwidth. So I think that was also kind of clear that the score was going to be more in the role of connecting threads and just kind of weaving things together, rather than just having these multiple like bombastic moments where it's in the forefront. So I think that that was that was the challenge of Joker 2, was basically just to figure out this jigsaw puzzle, and try to make that work. Ooh.
Sorry. I think Joker is on HBO today or next week. It will be streaming. In case you haven't seen it in a movie theater, I don't think it's in a movie theater, but you can watch now streaming, everyone. I'm gonna go through, and so it's kind of a mix now about different things we've talked about, but I want to go through all the questions in the chat room and then open up to more questions. So Kamara asked, is there anywhere we can go to hear this character-specific pieces of music referring to Tar?
Yeah. Yeah, so basically I mean, I actually forgot to say the last layer of music for Tara was that, of course, in the film she's working on a release for Deutsche Grammophon, and that's what she's kind of preparing the whole way through in the film. And I thought it was super important that we actually, in the parallel universe of real life, finished her record, and that she would get to release her record in real life that she never got finished in the film. So we released this record on Deutsche Grammophon, and there is kind of, and that's kind of, I thought that was quite lovely too. It's kind of like a process record, so you can hear, like, comments that I'm making during the recording session, and you can hear kind of like the rehearsals of certain pieces, and Kate conducting some pieces, and they're on that record that you can hear these character study pieces.
It's a great vinyl.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's really nice.
Besides pitching the door sound down, what else did you do to get it to the final sound? Meaning, what techniques of processing do you use other than pitching?
Oh God, I used just everything that I could. I mean, EQing was probably the biggest part of the process, and was really just that kind of finding the frequencies that were kind of resonating the strongest, or something interesting was happening. And so I'd say EQ was probably number one. Pitching was probably number two. Time shifting was also, like, very very prevalent, and some tape processing, and some sort of kind of like general. Yeah, I mean, I think those were like the biggest part of the process, and I think EQ was really the king of that process.
And do you have a specific software hardware that you use for that, or that is your go-to programs?
Well, I work in Cubase, and I was also working in Ableton quite a bit for this, and then Fab Filter is the EQ that I'm using, and that's really it's a really magnificent EQ.
Angelica, do you want to ask the question, Angelica, or do you want me to read it? If you just want to unmute. Oh, here you are.
Hello, I just asked if you could kind of define the layers of what you use. You've talked about several layers: music, field recording, orchestration, and scoring the picture. Can you kind of describe your layers and the team that you work with, like if you work with any orchestrators or arrangers?
Yeah, I often work with my husband, Sam Slater. So he worked with me he produced Chernobyl and Joker. And then for orchestrators, I often work with Rob Ames and Jeff Admagian. And then I sometimes work with my little brother also, Tóti Guðnason, on like, he sometimes does additional arranging, or gives a hand with some like editing or stuff like that. And a friend of mine that I used to play with in a band called Moom from Iceland, Guðnadóttir, my friend, he often sometimes does some like music editing work and stuff like this. But other than that, I don't really have like a team. I kind of, after yeah, after everything kind of blew up, after the Oscar and all of this, and then COVID happened, and I felt kind of during COVID that I wanted to kind of step back a little bit from kind of like a lot of stuff and people and things. So I kind of went back to just doing most things myself again. So yeah, so I've been doing just a lot by myself, and then sometimes Sam jumps in for some things here and there, and or Rob jumps in for like some orchestrating here or there when I'm locked in. But yeah, I've been doing a lot just by myself again, which is nice. I think it's nice to kind of. I think it's nice to hop back and forth. I mean, it means that I'm like, because I've never had a manager in my life. So I have a magnificent agent who does like phenomenal work. But and of course I work with, Thomas as a publicist. But but like a normal like manager or booking agent or something like this, I've never worked with anything like that. So I was kind of, like when I started out, I recorded everything and played everything and composed everything and mixed everything by myself and booked all the shows and did everything. So it's I'm very much of that kind of DIY mindset and believing that I along with being like a single parent and all of this, like I can still juggle all these balls, and I try to tell myself that I can, and then people like Thomas have to endure my sensationally slow emailing responses. Like glacial tempo emailing.
I prefer that over the Hildur Guðnadóttir factory. Really don't even know who wrote the music here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I really, I think that a lot of people expected me to do that, to kind of after, these big successes and all of this, to kind of start, move to LA and start a factory. And I'm so uninterested in that. And I I'm basically now I'm working in this like tiny little room on the first floor of my house, because my working situation has been hilarious, and I've been working out of like 5 different Airbnb flats over the last 4 years, and I've written like 6 scores or whatever in some like random rooms, because the studio that I'm building just is taking forever. So it's and I kind of, I kind of, this is where I come from, and this is how I kind of grew up making music, and I think that's also kind of like a part of the process, is this very happening atmosphere. So there's not a lot of team going on here.
But one thing you're really good at, and I so appreciate it about you, it's like, it sounds like you're super busy with it. I mean, and this is just part of it. It's the scoring, but I mean, you're also still doing live gigs. You just came back from Harvard where you give a master. I mean, you have a packed schedule, but you're really good in taking, like, listening and feeling, yeah, but what does this body, what do I need in order to create again? There's so many times, and I rather you not getting back on an email, because I know you're at the lake taking time for yourself, and you're really good at that. And I think that's so important as an artist, and also as a as a parent, to take the time to actually then have the energy for, and you always make sure, for your family always comes first. That's so important.
Yeah. No, that's really that's really my main priority is and always will be my son. So he, I'm very much like a very active soccer mom. So I basically take him to every training 4 times a week, and it just kind of fit my schedule with his schedule. So I did all my interviews in the car outside outside soccer training for the whole like campaigning situations and all of this. So it's a lot of like juggling and puzzling, but like you said, I'd rather just have this reputation of just being glacially slow at replies, and people know that I don't mean it in any bad way, that I'm just, my head is just somewhere else at the moment. And I think that also like should be allowed. I think you should be allowed to just be a person before, like, what you do for your work. I think that, and that's one of the problems that I have with today's kind of tempo, is this constant kind of demand that you have to reply to everything right away and stuff like that. Like I'm very actively in my own little world kind of demonstrating that by not taking part of that. And it takes a while to build up that reputation, but now kind of I think everyone knows like, oh, okay, she just doesn't reply, and that's okay.
No, and I think people appreciate that. For me, it's great. I know Thursday, 5:30 to 6:30.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll be in your car, so we'll do interviews.
Exactly.
So Leah has a question, and after Leah, Annie.
Mm.
Oh, Hilda, I've so loved hearing about your intentionality and nurturing on process and focus on that. And I'd really love to hear more about how you approach it when you do a recording session. What's the ritual like for you? And you being a string player, what's important to you when you step into record live? And, if I was to step into one of your sessions as a player, how would you like that process to be for me and for you?
Yeah. So you mean like when I'm recording with other people, like an orchestra session or something like it? Yeah. Because I'm quite ritualistic. Like my day is very kind of I have like my perfect day is very almost like always the same structure, and I always like to do things in the same order, and so I like to practice every day, and I like to record every day, and I like to meditate every day, and I have this like order of things to do, and so the recording. When I'm recording by myself, then that'll come like at the after lunch when I've already done all the other things leading up to it. But when I'm recording with other people, I think the most important thing for me is to have the time to just connect to people, that the people that are playing. So I try to have the recordings scheduled like not too tight, so I don't like kind of just powering through recordings. I like to have like enough time to just kind of be able to feel it with everyone, and like that everyone has the space to listen, and I don't really I'm not really a conductor myself, so I don't conduct sessions, but I'm very present in the listening and kind of verbal explaining, because I feel like because being a performer and being so used to performing so much of my music myself, I think there's a lot of feeling that I have like that I can't really put on paper, that I need to kind of just be there to explain or like or demonstrate or a lot of the times just kind of like sing or vocalize or make some sort of noises. So my recording sessions are normally just quite relaxed and well, I say relaxed and intense, because I also like to go into a lot of detail, so it's a lot of doing the same thing again and again, basically. Like the piece for Patra, the piece that I wrote for that Kate is writing in tar. Like I think I wanted to do that in one long take, like every single time. So I think it was like the 17th or 18th full take of the whole piece that we did, that I was like, oh, okay, that's it. No, so people are going a little bit loopy, but just like really taking the time to hearing the music and feeling the music, I think is what I find most important.
Thank you.
Is there room during the recording sessions then, when you work that way, for changes, and do you sometimes also discover new sounds or new do you change it during recording also, or are you stuck with what you've written before?
No, definitely. I'm really open to what people have to bring to the table. Like I love getting people's instrumentalists' opinion about what they're playing, because I think a person, a musician has always like without a doubt a much better understanding of their connection to their instrument than I can ever have. So and that's actually also one of the ways that I work is very often who I work with is more important than what they're playing. So my personal connection to a person which is also why you can hear like, my team is like my husband, my brother, and my best friend since I was 14. It's the personal connection is extremely important to me. Yeah, that's always on the top.
Oh, Annie, you have a question, Annie Hunt?
Hi, yeah. I guess this is more of a philosophical question. I wrote it while you were explaining things, but I'm coming from a band background and doing like a touring indie act, and now I'm morphing into this film composing world, and I've been really overwhelmed by the successful composers I see, especially in New York City. They're stressed out, like so stressed out, and
Yeah.
they feel so much
Yeah.
pressure to say yes to everything. And
Yeah.
I've got 2 kids. I don't know if you see the dollhouse here.
Yeah.
I'm really, balancing taking care of the household and feeling
Yeah.
this pressure to like seek as much work as possible. And I was wondering, were you able to get to this point of your career after saying yes to everything, or were you just like, I'm just going to stay focused and make my best work and move on from there, or whatever else?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most important decisions I made in that regard was when I was deciding in maybe like 2005 whether I should move to New York or stay in Berlin. Because I was like, okay, because I love New York and I go to New York a lot and I have like a lot of friends in New York and I really spent a lot of time there. I totally adore the city, but I realized that I couldn't live there because I just realized that like, okay, I'm going to be working in a cafe and I'm not going to be writing music because it's just so expensive. So I kind of calculated that it was going to be more, I could write more music with less money if I lived in Berlin because it was like dirt cheap when I first moved here 20 years ago. So yeah, so I totally understand what you're saying in the city because New York is also such an interesting place because there's so much energy in the city. Just like as soon as you, or even if I haven't even landed, I'm just above the city, and I just feel like there's like, whoa, it just starts kind of like roaring the energy of the place, which is amazing, but I can imagine that it's hard to find between 2 kids the city and all these different jobs. It's difficult to probably find the time to do everything and the solitude and calm that you that you probably need to do them as well. But I think I mean, there's only so much time in the day that you have, and I think that understanding that and being okay with that, and just kind of maybe being really clear on what it is that you that you really want to emphasize, and just put the whatever time that you have into that. I think would probably be my my advice in this case. Just being really clear, like, do I want to use how old are your kids?
They're 14 and 9. They're starting to get self-sufficient.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So you have a little bit,
We're
yeah, okay.
moving
So
on,
they're
yeah.
not like 2 and 5. Okay, I was gonna say this is gonna be way more way more difficult if they're
They
younger.
still need like snacks and bedtime.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so you're at the place where you can really just like schedule actual times of the day where you are just working and doing nothing else. And I think just having a really clear focus of what you want to do with that time is super helpful. Like and maybe also just like understanding, like, do you really want to focus on the films, or do you want to focus on the bands, and kind of take it from there? Because I had to make this decision because I also came from like a band, like an indie band environment, and I was basically on tour 300 days of the year, like constantly on tour. And then when I had my son, I was like, well, I can't really do that anymore, and I kind of also don't really want to do that anymore. It's kind of tiring and draining. So I was like, well, I'll need to work from home more, and then these films just kind of started to happen at the same time almost. So I was able to just like work more from home. So that happened kind of naturally, and I think it probably happened because I realized I go, okay, I can't be on tour all the time. I will need to focus on something that I can do at home. And the films kind of started happening as a consequence. So I think really making clear decisions about the direction that you want to go, and sticking with that, would be, and putting like specific times of the day where you're going to do that, and just like, having like non-negotiable 3 hours or whatever, because I think you can, I think this is the superpower that you have to kind of, you're kind of forced to embody as a working mom, is like, working in this, getting incredible amount of work done in specific time frames, and I think that there's often a lot that you can get done in very focused amounts of time,
Last question, just last member question, because we're running to the 1 hour point. I'm going to read it. And it goes back to Joker, your latest project. So interesting about considering Joker as a jigsaw. Once you processed field recording sounds, what does then applying them to picture look like for you? Is that a jigsaw for you too?
Yeah, it's a bit of a jigsaw. I think the general process is for me is kind of, when I read a script and I have an idea, or I have a feeling, and I kind of, the first thing is to understand what the sound world is, the general kind of the thing that's going to hold everything. And then I'll find the kind of the vehicles of like working within that sound world. So be that, how I record, or what I record, or what instruments I'm using, what the orchestration is, and all of this. And then you can kind of start writing the music, I think, into that, when you understand what that process is. So in that second phase of understanding what the orchestration or the process is, there, it kind of depends on what the process is, how much experimentation there is, and how many unknowns there are before I can actually start writing the music. So there's a lot of collecting that happens normally in this period, but there's it varies greatly, like, between processes, but there's always this kind of these maybe let's say like 4 phases, because then when you have the material, or the world, the recordings, the instruments, or whatever that you're working with, then it's writing some of the core music normally, because normally I won't have film at that point. Normally I'll be working, this will be happening like during the shooting process or before the shooting process, so I'll be like, writing the music at that like early stage. And then of course, like, as the editing starts and I start getting dailies or rough edits or something like this, then I'll start, bringing that material and kind of editing to picture, or like changing it to picture, and writing material that was missing to picture or something like this, so it's it's like 4 or 5 layers of different working methods.
Hildur, this was interesting, fascinating. I know we could talk another hour. So great to have you. Thank you for taking the time. I'm super excited about next year. You worked on Mira Costa's Heather, and it's a story that I really like, and I look forward to seeing the film and hearing your music. And I know you have tons of other stuff going on, from like the concerts in March, the soundtrack festival in London, to tons of other stuff. So we'll hear a lot from you next year, I have a feeling.
I hope so. Yeah. Great to see everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Really, very much appreciated.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.